Okay, I started recording. And we'll start letting folks in. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our Chicago Wilderness Alliance Cafe. I want to give it a minute for folks to join us, and then we'll get started. Please feel free to keep yourself on mute during the presentation portion, but we will have a question and answer session. And if you have any pressing questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat and we'll monitor that. I want to give a thank you to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources Urban and Community Forestry Program that supports the Chicago Wilderness Cafe series. This work is important to helping improve communication, collaboration, and shine a spotlight on the work that's happening around the region, and to help more communities find out about urban tree canopy forest opportunities. Please click on the links to find out if you or your community can be a part of the Tree City USA program. Looks like it's slowed a little bit, so I'm going to introduce Shu Sang from Smith Group. Thank you very much for giving this presentation, and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Laura, and I feel extremely honored to be given this opportunity to share my learning and my journey with traditional ecological knowledge. And I will introduce my learning with it, but I'm also looking forward to learn from all of you today. So the presentation is mostly about the soil conservation from traditional ecological knowledge, and a little bit of an introduction. And so this exploration and study is originated from a program with Smith Group. It's called Exploration Grant. And so basically the company provide this opportunity for you to spend, for employee to spend about 150 hours to study any topics that's interested to them. And so I had unfortunate enough was able to win the exploration grant for 2024, and that's where my journey began. And so the reason why I chose this topics is at the beginning of this exploration, I began to see a lot of sustainable practices associated with technology advancement, especially in rural areas, in farmlands, that you begin to see more like solar fields and things like that. And that's interesting, but also my gut feeling was telling me that that was fully highly one-dimensional, goal-oriented. It's not a very holistic way of seeing sustainability. And oftentimes, like a lot of the technology practices, like kind of turn a blind eye to ecology and the biodiversity. So, and at the same time, I began to think about some of the traditional practices. So, when I visit Southwest, I see the Pueblo architecture in the Southwest US, where you have this wonderful traditional architectural practice that existed for thousands of years, and then it's still performing really well in terms of like energy saving and sustainability. So my question was, what can we learn from those traditional wisdoms and sustainability practice that we can still apply today? But the reality is, I'm not like, I didn't grow up in US, so but it's easy to observe there is a disconnect between the tradition and our current practices with the history of like colonialism. A lot of the traditional wisdom is lost, and there was not a there was a disconnect between that traditional practice and our current practice. So yeah, so that's like the beginning of I have the question about what can I learn about traditional ecological knowledge. And as I mentioned, this is this is just a study I only began to explore in the last year. And the topic covers so much different range of themes. And as I dive more into the topic, I decided to center my energy and focus more around the local knowledge and the ecological knowledge and land management. But this is a topic that concludes like at a lower level, your individual values and philosophies. At a higher value, it contains a whole worldview and stories and social institutions, ethics. So, but for the limited resources and time I had, I studied mostly the land management resource. And so why did I look into soil? Because soil is such an important um, resource that we often overlooked. We depend on soil in our almost every aspect of our daily life, from food production, construction materials, medicine, but it's so overlooked. And without healthy like plants and wildlife, human health will eventually suffer as well. Um, and soil is a big marketplace where the nutrients exchange, and a lot of the global carbon and nitrogens are cycled through soil and sequestered in soil. And a healthy soil contains high organic matter and carbon that have better absorption of water, and also reduces the runoff of stormwater. And there is an opportunity to enrich soil and sequester carbon with better soil management as well. So, but what we are facing is a problem because over the past centuries, development, modern agricultural practices, and deforestation, they all have drastically changed the nutrient cycle of the soil, and the topsoil is diminishing with erosion, and the erosion occurs 10 times faster than its natural formation. As we know, the soil formation naturally is a really, really slow process. And in the Midwest, for example, tons of topsoils are carried to Gulf of Mexico every year through the Mississippi River. And improper use of fertilizers also further contribute to the problem with acidification of the soil. And the soil loss really exacerbate our access to food, medicine, and also climate change. So from talk about the problem a little bit, and and then I turn to the traditional ecological kind of knowledge through more of a literature review standpoint, and then also trying to go to the field and trying to learn from some of the land managers and the people who manage the land, see what I can learn about from land management. And as we know, when if we trace our time back to like the 1500s, and when the European settlers, when they first arrived in North America, they thought the forests looked pristine with like open spaces in between, where they can ride a horse wagon in between. But they thought it was a wild kind of a natural state, but these landscapes were not wild, but tended by the Native Americans at a time. And there was a misconception that the Native Americans lived in a static harmony with untouched nature. In reality, the land is heavily engaged with human activities, and there are evidence that how the ecological system formed today, such as the prairies in the Midwest, they are shaped both by like natural forces such as lightning, but also by the land management of the Native Americans. So Native American managed one of the, or indigenous people managed one of the most productive natural habitats. And it is not in a steady state ecosystem, but it's a very highly dynamic ecosystem with mosaics of various different conditions. And there's studies showing that like 8% of the indigenous people in terms of population manage almost like 80% of biological hotspots around the world. And why does that happen? And one of the ecological theory that I've learned is the proposed by J.H. Cornell is the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. So what we have learned from like sweet grasses and also some of other, if you watch like quaking aspens, the poplar family like trees, they really thrive on human disturbance. When there's like when it was not tended, they tend to be much less successful, even in decline. And what explains that is because sometimes the ecosystem benefit from moderate human disturbance, not like deforestation, but if it's a practice of like median intensity, such as like grazing, moderate grazing, things like that, it tend to increase the diversity and the vitality of the plants. And this diagram is showing that concept. And another interesting idea I find is oftentimes we think like in our modern society, humans are usually the villains of like natural preservation because we're destroying the land, we're putting up developments. But if you look at how the indigenous people have managed the land, um, they not only didn't destroy the habitat, but they actually created favorable conditions for other species within a community, because that I found that to be interesting, because in ecology, there's this idea of keystone species where the species create a very important role creating habitat for other species such as beavers and bees, and but in the indigenous people kind of plays the role of a keystone species, such as like creating the sweetgrass harvest because you need to harvest the sweetgrass to promote its growth. And also, yeah, definitely oak tree would definitely be a great example of keystone species because there's so many insects, butterflies that rely on oak trees in their life cycle. Yeah, so another example is the Amah Nation people. They would trim down the lower hanging branches and they would gather like fallen leaves around the tree to burn a circle of fire. And this practice kind of inhibit the insect, the disease, and also killing the pest living in the tree. And the seasonal scheduled burning that really unload the forest fuels and prevent like bigger forest fires, but it also promotes the growth of some native plants, reduce insects and diseases for the ecosystem health, and increase the diversity and quantity of grasses. Yeah, so that's kind of summarizes some ecological concept, but then I try to summarize the strategy, the lessons that we can learn from what we can do, kind of mimic some of the indigenous practice in today. And I try to categorize some of the strategies into 4 different categories. And the first one is using animal. The second is about using plants. And the third one is about water. And the fourth one is with fire. And I'll try to explain a little more about each of the strategies. And the first one is about integrating animals into the system. I mentioned earlier, like moderate activity, such as grazing, it not only enhances biodiversity, but also improves the soil health and contribute to carbon sequestration. Because the grazing actually removing the old and decaying and the dead plant materials, and it also opened up more sunlight to reach the base of the plant where the growth occurs. And although the disturbances temporarily set back the plant growth, but over time it leads to more robust root development and it promotes healthier richer grass. But obviously this is a delicate balance to be managed to prevent overglazing as well. But that's another knowledge that really needs to learn about how to check and balance these forces. And another idea about using switching, and then another concept about plants is about switching to perennials. In our today's practice of landscaping and designs, we use a lot of exotic and a lot of annual plants. But there is a significant difference between the perennial and annual plants. Because the annual plants, they complete their life cycle within one season, so they invest their energy not in their like roots, but in their seeds, so that can carry their genetic legacy because they're so short-lived. While the annual plants, they try to like and so because they invest so much in their seed, it often leads to the nutrient depletion and also weaken the soil structure. But on the contrary, in this diagram, you see the perennial plants, they have much deeper roots, almost like 20 times deeper in some of the than some of the annual plants. And because they really invest their energy in their roots, sometimes they don't spurt like they don't sprout until the season and the environmental condition is right. So they can ensure that it can regrow every season, and more than half of the roots are replaced every year, and the decomposition of the tissues from deep soils are contained with like high organic matter. And there's another advantage with prairie with like perennial grasses, because all those carbon are stored underground. Oftentimes, if we have a forest fire, and then so the leaves and the branches are all burned down. But in the cases of prairie, because so much carbon is stored underground, it is actually secured from fire and other natural disturbances. Another concept about planting is to use multi-layered planting, because plants are really important, and the multi-layer planting, we need to apply a combination of different plant types, height and leaf sizes and canopy density to optimize the collection of sunlight, because this like allow us to maximize the use of sun. But also the woody plants, as we mentioned earlier, are so important to many cycles of insects, and there's hundreds of like caterpillar. They depend on like oak trees and ash trees and woody plants to complete their life cycle. And so this strategy of like combining canopy plant to provide windbreak and shade and mulch, but also having multiple species with shade-loving species and ground cover to retain the moisture. and that we can maximize the land and energy. And another practice that is often seen with traditional society in indigenous societies, the idea of a companion planting, I think, and that is the idea to place several plants in proximity together that they benefit each other in a very synergistic way. That one example we probably all have heard of is the Three Sisters, that is the traditional Native American practice, planting corn, beans, and squash together. These three species work together so well that they create a mutually benefit environment. The corn has the taller stalk that creates a structural support for the climbing of the beans, and below ground, the um, and the peas kind of have the ground cover. The squash have the leaf that larger leaf covers the ground that keeps the moisture of the ground. And also the peas have the nitrogen fixing quality that really enriches the soil as well. And this creates a very thriving and also low maintenance ecosystem. And here are some of the other technique I've seen in the traditional practices in terms of like agriculture and land management, is to have, one of them is to have a raised planting bed. And water plays such an important role in soil health, and the to have proper moisture really helps the binding of the soil and the improve aeration. It's also really important for the nutrients to transport and dissolve. This type of planting practice, it obviously doesn't work everywhere, but it works in areas, in regions where we have very poor and or waterlogged soil. And because by elevating the planting structure, it creates a better aeration, better drainage, and also enhance the soil fertility. And sometimes you can also combine like fish and other organisms in the water, that you have the additional benefit of collecting the organic waste from these organisms and plants, and this creates a very nutritious muck like at the bottom, and then this could be further like used to enrich the plants in this way. In contrary to raised planting bed, we can also have sunken planting bed. And this technique is used in areas where we need to conserve water, and it's a strategy for water conservation, and the soil is dug below ground to capture and retain water. And this reduces water loss and enhances the moisture availability for plants. And it works best in like areas that has very limited rainfall and prone to drought, and where you really want to focus on water conservation. And this sunken bed can often paired with like terracing or check dams, like to further manage the water flow across. And one of the more famous example is the waffle garden in like the Southwest US that use this kind of technique. And now we can talk about fire, because I think we probably all have heard about prescribed fire a lot, but there's also this concept of succession from after the fire, this natural process of like plant communities recover and evolve after a fire. It's a subset of this successional idea, the post-fire succession. And this process really impact the soil. The pioneer species like growing like fast and often hardy first colonized the barren land after the fire. And the pioneer species help stabilize the soil with the fast-growing root. And then after that, there was an intermediate species came after the pioneer species, adding to the diversity of plant community. And this really increased the plant and also microorganism activity. And this can improve soil quality and create a richer organic layer. Um, and then this ecosystems evolves into a more stable and mature ecosystem in the last stage of succession. And then we can repeat the cycle again with another fire, trying to release the nutrient and the biomass back to the soil, enriching it for future plant growth. This ash from like burning acts as natural fertilizer, boosting soil productivity and supporting early successional species. So the practice of burning sometimes create a byproduct, and that's called biochar. And the biochar is created in with high temperature without oxygen, often like below ground. And the use of biochar can reduce the use of fertilizer. It doesn't have nutrient itself, but it helps increase the water holding capacity of soil. It is um, it is a technique that needs to be probably explored further to see how it could be really tested and use it, apply in a way that's to create a more stable and organic, to have a to reduce the fertilizer and increase the water holding capacity. Yeah, I think I've talked a lot. Hopefully you are not bored yet, and I think I can talk about a case study where how some of the concepts are applied, bringing some of the techniques together. And this is a case study about Milpa Forest Garden. And so the Milpa Garden is a traditional agricultural system that was developed by the Mayan people. Um, and they have been using this for thousands of years. And in the Nahuatl phrase, milpa means cultivated fields, but it is a system that really centers on maize and corn production, and it transitions into a woolen system, and this system really relies on the succession, and rather than using like pesticides and fertilizer, and fire is really an important element in this process, making sure the continuity of the system. And how it works is in the beginning, they usually find a land that's like maybe a mature forest. They slash and burn it. I mean, slash and burn usually have a bad reputation, but in this case, it's really a part of this very robust and sophisticated system. And in the stage one, you are planted with high yield agricultural products such as the Three Sisters, corns and squash and beans. And then in the second stage, after these plants are established, we're adding fruit trees that are quick yielding to create a garden. And while the fruit trees mature, the more plants are introduced to include like slower yielding fruit trees to create a food forest. And in the final stage, like hardwood forest, this forest garden evolved into a more hardwood forest that's like more similar to the beginning of this cycle. And then you can complete this cycle again by starting with a fire. And this whole process lasts more about 15 to 20 years, and it's a really longer cycle. And here is showing really that mosaic kind of patches of different stages of land at the same time. So you can have like crop forests and garden forests and hardwood forests all together at the same time at different stages, managing the land at different stages in terms of the succession. And that's showing that. Yeah, so that's a case study kind of brings some of technique together. And so the findings of like what I have find obviously is not intended to have a very exhaustive overview of indigenous knowledge and soil conservation. And this is just like my beginning and initial exploration of this like really vast resources of ecological wisdom. And I am really looking forward to continue this learning process and have more findings and have deeper engagement in this area. Um, and I'm also just thinking about how and places and actions that we can take even in like our backyard, maybe. And this can happen beyond like rural communities and agricultural communities. And we can have like carbon-rich garden in a rooftop, community garden, urban farms, and maybe we can help like apply some of the techniques and increase the awareness and appreciation for natural resources and ones who tend it. And I want to end with just a quote from like Aldo Leopold, and I think really not only although I talk more about like kind of ecological lessons I learned, but I also believe there's a philosophical and the paradigm shift that we should have, like rather than seeing land as a property and that we're entitled to, that we have ownership, we should see it as a community where we belong, and we may begin to use it with love and respect. And I will end my presentation here, and I'm hoping if you all have some questions and or some like, any other knowledge that you would like to share, or anything or any direction that you feel we can study like more and to continue the study. And also maybe also curious to hear your thoughts on actions and how we can apply this.
Thank you so much, Shu. Yeah, at this point, let's please open up to questions. You can either put them in the chat or just raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask a question. John, I see you noted that the audio was cutting out. Is it okay now? Oh, Alicia, go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much. Such a wonderful presentation. I wanted to broach the idea of, incorporating a lot of indigenous practices and perhaps how do we show respect to, the groups and folks who have created this knowledge? How do you demonstrate this reverence? Is there something that you do or can suggest that you do to show respect and appreciation for these knowledge sources?
Yeah, I think that's such a wonderful question, because I think unfortunately, like, it's really deeply sad to learn that a lot of times, like, these wealth of knowledge is kind of lost to, I mean, there's such a disconnect. And even if you ask some of the local and like the people with indigenous heritage, a lot of them, they don't, because they don't lost that connection to the land. So they don't have that, like, and a lot of the knowledge was not written down. And I feel like we are really respecting the land by continuing the practice, for example. But definitely, I think we should like try to, I don't know, don't have an answer to how we can do it, but definitely engage, like have, maybe the best scenario will be have the indigenous people manage their land. That would be the ideal scenario, but obviously that probably won't happen in a lot of cases. But I think it's paying them respect by maybe keeping a better record of these knowledge, so we can continue this, restore this connection between the land and our actions. And Yeah, I don't, I wonder what you all think about, like, but definitely should like pay respect to, you know,
Yeah, and
thank you.
Nataka, I think you might have some good ideas here because I know that we were
Mm.
just inspired and with you on Saturday to learn more about this. So would you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you for the presentation. And Alicia, thank you for your question because I was wondering and turning over the same thing too, which is, I know for when we look at knowledge related to Indigenous practices, whether that's Native folks, whether that's Black folks, um, oftentimes we are left out of the conversation, and there are knowledge carriers.
Mhm.
There are folks writing, there are people presenting, and it's really hard because we're sort of in this place of how do we level up where people are understanding the worldview and are shifting in the ways in which they're doing their work. But how do we do that in if you all remember from my presentation, a second order way where we are not leaving behind the voices of people who do the work? Because from a Black and Native perspective, oftentimes we feel like this work gets taken out of our hands and our voices and are presented, and we're left behind, and that hurts. That's a continuation of what happens to us, and that's why we had that conference this past week, because we wanted it to be strongly from our voice and from where we are. And I think we have to be careful around this. And we have to do this, as Alicia said, in ways that are very respectful to the people when we're speaking on people's knowledge, particularly when that knowledge has been extracted and taken and have left these communities without land to practice on. There's a lot of stuff happening that I think we need to be mindful of. So, what I would say is that there are absolutely tribes, urban Native folks, Black folks in the United States that are working hard for remembering, for reconnecting. And I think it's important that we partner and deeply partner in very deep, meaningful, reciprocal ways with those communities for those folks to be the knowledge carriers as they are putting forth this knowledge. Um, I think that that's really important that we keep that at the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. I think it's also, I think it's also helpful to kind of seeing the value of the traditional ecological knowledge, because a lot of times our, like, corporates and people, unfortunately people who are actually managing the land, they are lacking that perspective. That's why we see like practices that um not so having such a holistic viewpoints and seeing that connection, um, which they didn't put enough value in the traditional ecological knowledge. I think acknowledging like the value of the indigenous people and not acknowledging that knowledge is valuable is a beginning, and then the next step will definitely be um, involve like engaging the community and give them like try to restore that connection that was lost. But I also think it's important to just even um, make them like, changing how the way of we're doing things, but also instead of like using just put up a solar farm, maybe we can have like learn about other different ways of practice. Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Yeah, I've also love to hear your thoughts about any like areas maybe we can test out some of these techniques, and you know um how we can actually implement some of the ideas, engaging the indigenous people, engaging like also kind of to also learning more about restoring that connection.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shu. And it sounds like, as we know, we have more learning and more work to do to create those partnerships and those relationships to elevate the conversation and the learning. Marcia Kay said there's a large food community garden on Howard and Ashland. Next to it, there's an open field, and then maybe that can be used. That's a great idea.
I think Kristen mentioned that she asked a question, but I'm trying to find.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Kristen. It did get buried. It says, are there current projects in the Chicago area that make use of these techniques? I would love to experience them firsthand. And Nakataka, I don't know if you want to address that, or Jay, is Jay here today?
I'm so sorry. I kept getting kicked out and back
Oh,
in. I'm just back in. So
oh
I,
no.
yeah,
No.
internet is not. So I'm sorry. I don't know what I didn't hear the last like 4 minutes.
The question was, are there current projects in Chicago that make use of these techniques? I would love to experience them firsthand. This was from Kristen Scott.
So, Kristen, yeah, so I can say that the American Indian Center is doing work and in partnerships to start moving forward in doing these techniques, and we do them through our food sovereignty program. So some of the things that Zhu Zhang talked about, we are practicing. So I would say, please get in contact with the American Indian Center, find out what they are doing and the activities. I know Trickster also does some good work, Gina Roxas. And then once again, I know that some of the tribes in the area are doing some stuff like Menominee and Wisconsin. I mean, there are knowledge keepers. There's also a lot of Black folks who are doing some amazing work around these areas, near and around the U.S. There's tons of folks who are doing this work, um, that would love to be in connection with people to teach for sure.
Yeah. I put the web address for the American Indian Center in the chat, and I will also put So Renee Patton said there's a neighborhood garden space in Edgewater that just planted a food forest with CRTI, and they have space there to experiment. And she put her email into the chat.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks. I think the challenge is like what we could use help with is the engagement and outreach and like getting the right people involved. But open to playing and having fun and experimenting there for sure.
And Alicia Fox said that they hope to get this very thing started with the Black Earth Restoration Collective. And she put the website address into the chat as well. Thank you, Alicia. So I feel like this conversation, like many of these conversations, are opportunities to sort of keep the dialogue and the learning going, and so that we can learn more. And honestly, if we want to invite further cafes from anyone who would like to share more about the work that they're doing, whether it is at the Black Earth Restoration Collective or others, we would be happy to host a cafe. It's very simple. There's just a simple form that you fill out in order to do that. I'm going to put a link to our webpage in the chat. And you can either partner with some of your partners or collaborators, or the conversation can be created in a way that, you can invite You can do a panel discussion. You can invite other colleagues who are working in that space to bring the conversation forward. And I think this is a good example of it. Maybe finding some of the folks around the region who are doing this on the ground. It might be a really great way to spotlight the work that they're doing. So, or continue to spotlight the work that they're doing and grow awareness and connections with each other. Okay, any more questions? If not, I do want to reemphasize that the recording and a PDF of the files, the presentation will be posted to the website, and we will save the chat for anyone who has some information there. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.